Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Tina Hokum, Director of Social Services for the Entertainment Community Fund. We're so glad that you could join us today for our webinar on the FEMA appeals process. I will be facilitating our conversation with our speakers from the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, Nisa Satie, who's the Pro Bono Project Manager, and Jennifer Andler-Gable, Regional Counsel at Legal Services of Northern California and FEMA expert. I wanted to acknowledge and thank the Entertainment Industry Coalition of unions, guilds, and nonprofits that have all come together since January to co-sponsor this series of webinars. Before we get into our content today, I'm going to quickly describe how we will use our webinar space. On the bottom toolbar of your screen, you will see that we have a closed caption as an option. And to utilize this feature, you need to click on the closed caption icon. Also on the bottom toolbar, you'll see the chat icon. Click on that icon to see the chat bar come up alongside of your screen. Today, we're going to use the chat feature to share resources such as links and PDFs. Please know you can cut and paste information from that chat bar into another Word document, notes, or an email that you can send to yourself. Following today's session, we will be sending everyone the information we placed in the chat into a follow-up email. You can submit questions by clicking the Q&A icon. If you want to submit an anonymous question, it is recommended to click the icon and click anonymous first before you begin to type. You may accidentally submit a question with your name appearing otherwise. We will curate questions as they come in. We will make every effort to answer as many questions as we can, but we might need to limit the number of questions just to get through the material. If you really like a question that someone else has sent, please feel free to upvote that question by using the reaction button and giving us a thumbs up. That will help us curate what questions to answer first. Our format today will be to cover and review a section of content and then open up for questions related to that section only, and then move on to the next section. And we hope to have just a general Q&A at the end of our time today. Lastly, this webinar will be recorded and available on our Entertainment Community Fund client portal and website, as well as available through all of our community partners co-sponsoring today. We will share information about that in our follow-up email. Before we welcome our guests, we wanted to emphasize that all of the community partners participating in this event are offering a wide range of services, including emergency financial assistance, mental health support, and practical help, helping everyone connect to benefits and resources. If you need help, we hope that you reach out. We are committed to walking through this recovery process with each of you. At the Entertainment Community Fund, we wanted to highlight 2 support group spaces that are available to you. Every Tuesday, we provide a virtual drop-in support group called Recovering Together. It's Tuesdays, 12 to 1:30, and you'll see that link with more information in the chat. In October and in November, in each month, we will be offering a 4-week grief group for members of our community to come together, get some support, and to connect around feelings around the grief and loss you may be experiencing. Both of these offerings are in the chat, and we encourage you to check them out and see if it's right for you. Without further delay, let's welcome Nisa Satie. Thank you, Nisa, for being with us today, and we're excited to jump in.
Thank you so much, Tina. It's been really great to collaborate with your organization, and I'm so impressed by all of the great services and resources that you're providing to this community. So thank you again. As Tina said, my name is Nisa Satie, and I am a pro bono project manager at the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, also known as LAFLA. Again, we're so appreciative of being able to speak with you all, and our hearts go out to all of those who were affected by the wildfires earlier this year. At this point, we can begin our PowerPoint presentation. Thank you. Next slide, please. So in case you're not already familiar, I just wanted to briefly give you a little background on what LAFLA is. As I mentioned, we are a legal aid organization. We've been around for a long time, and our underlying mission is to improve the lives of low-income people in the Los Angeles area by providing equal access to justice. And we do that primarily through direct legal assistance, as well as education and systemic change. We have a pretty broad legal practice. And after the January 2025 wildfires, we opened a disaster response work group to better respond to the needs of the community. And among other things, through that work group, we are helping community members navigate the FEMA process. On this slide, I wanted to just share that if you are interested in applying for free legal assistance from LAFLA, you can call our general intake line. Here's the number, and I believe this will be included in the chat as well. Also, if you would like to be added to our email list to receive updates on any future disaster-related clinics or events, here is the link to do that as well. Next slide, please. Just a note that for free legal services, we do have income eligibility guidelines due to restrictions by our funders. And this is just to give you an idea of our general income eligibility guidelines. Next slide, please. Okay, at this point, we're going to transition to the more substantive portion of this webinar. And I would like to introduce Jennifer Anders Gable, Regional Counsel at Legal Services of Northern California, one of our sister organizations, who is going to be giving the rest of this presentation and answering your questions. Jennifer, or Jenny, has been really amazing. She has quite a bit of expertise when it comes to FEMA case handling. And in Northern California, unfortunately, dealing with wildfires is nothing new. So she has great experience and expertise to bring to the table, and I will pass it along to her.
Thank you, Nisa, and everyone for having me here today. What we're hoping to accomplish is to provide a little bit more context and familiarity and understanding with navigating with FEMA, particularly at this stage of recovery with FEMA's appeals process, what that looks like. And as was indicated earlier, to try to address as many general lingering questions that you all may have. So this here is the overview. We'll be talking about timelines, procedures, like what you want to put in a FEMA appeal, what a FEMA appeal is, the best practices. We can go to the next slide. So generally speaking, there are timelines, deadlines for submitting a FEMA appeal, which is essentially a response to a letter or a denial from FEMA where they have either said you're not eligible for anything or you're only eligible for certain things or a certain amount of relief, and you disagree with the decision. And so your appeal is your disagreement with what FEMA is telling you. And ordinarily there will be, this should be in writing, and there would be language toward the end that gives you your right to appeal that decision. And so typically you need to do that within 60 days of that letter. A lot, just practically, a lot of folks don't catch these in time. Sometimes they're not sent to, a current address, or you missed it on your online login page, or you're displaced because of the disaster, or you were in the hospital, or there's a lot of reasons why people miss these. And so they will, just so you know, accept late appeals, but you usually would have to say why you're submitting it later than the 60 days that they request. And so once you submit that appeal, then FEMA has 90 days on their side to review what you submitted, and to respond. Usually, what you are submitting is additional evidence, or you're providing documents that they requested. A lot of times, FEMA just needs more information to be able to make a decision, or a more favorable decision. So you're giving them extra proof, extra receipts, proof that you lived somewhere, proof that you rented something, proof that you owned certain personal property, and so oftentimes it's an exchange of documents in that way. Sometimes if you just sent those documents or sent that proof to them, that's something that they should accept, as you're sending that to them because you disagree with their decision, and that could be sufficient for an appeal. A lot of times, what you will receive FEMA's appeal form with that denial letter or with their letter, or maybe you've otherwise stumbled across the FEMA appeal form. It's pretty straightforward. You're not required to use that, but you may use that as well, or you can handwrite out additional information beyond what you're otherwise sending them. All of those things, all of those actions, all of that kind of back and forth with FEMA can count as an appeal, and so they will review that. There's no, hearing. There's no opportunity to make any oral arguments with them, but they will review what you give them, and then they will give you another written response. And they will say this is final, probably. Um, and maybe it's in your favor, or maybe it's not. But if they missed what you had to say, or if you have since acquired new evidence or new information, that might be a final decision. But you can then supplement and give them new information. And basically, what can wind up happening, and what does wind up happening, is a lot of folks will have multiple appeals, or a continued back and forth with FEMA, until either it's resolved, or basically until it's resolved, in that there is nothing else that you can prove or provide them, to be able to either find what you're after, or to be able, or maybe they did give you what you were after. It kind of depends on, if it's a yes or no, am I eligible, or if it's over a certain dollar amount. But we'll get into that more later. This is just the general timeline, so we can go to the next slide. So just as background, just so you know what happens generally when you send this information off into, whatever land it might be. A lot of people are uploading this in some way, online through their FEMA accounts. It's generally not an attorney looking at this file, looking at your appeal. It's some FEMA employee, who probably is looking at a lot of other appeals that day. And so the real key to keep in mind through all of this is what you give them should be like as clear and concise as possible, and you don't need to dress anything up in a very legal or formal fashion. Again, it's really about trying to provide new evidence, or give them something new to work with, so that they can say yes to your request, or so that you can get a denial or a response that you can actually understand. Because sometimes their initial response to you, it's unclear why you're not eligible. And so if you give them what they've requested, and they either abort it, and that's great, or they deny it, but hopefully in that review, they'll be able to more clearly explain why you're not eligible for more, or for what you're requesting. Um, so one would hope that, and oftentimes this does happen, that the FEMA employee will review your new proof or evidence or information that you give them, but they should also be reviewing your entire file, so that they can see, all the things that you've provided along the way, all of the things that FEMA has requested from you along the way. Sometimes before they make a decision, they might be reaching back out to you or to the inspector. Again, kind of depends on what the case is about, to get a little bit more information or clarification. Sometimes, again, depending upon the scenario, in this disaster situation, it might be for like a smoke damage situation. They might set another inspection. That would be less likely to happen at this stage of the recovery, particularly for a wildfire situation versus like a different kind of disaster, such as a hurricane or something where there might be flood damage or something that's still lingering. Most of the damage from this disaster, if a structure wasn't completely destroyed, most of the damage that was being inspected really had to do with smoke damage. Though that there could be people with other partially destroyed properties that might need another inspection. Okay, next slide, please. So, generally speaking, a FEMA decision, as I said earlier, it's final, except for if you do have new information. If things do change, you can keep giving them new information to work with, and they will generally accept that and give you, again, new responses, whether that's a favorable response or a denial and explanation why they're still unable to grant the request. You can do that for a while, and but up to really 18 months, which is when a disaster window for FEMA completely closes. So at that point, there's no more of the back and forth. It's too late to give them new information. So it is important to, try to resolve as much of this as you can early on. But there's also just the reality that sometimes your insurance is taking a while. A lot of times, you're battling kind of two problems at once, a FEMA problem and an insurance problem. And so it's hard to, when things are beyond your control, to be very timely. And so that's where you're trying to get as much to them as soon as you can. But also there is this recognition that um, some things you can't control. And so they give you this long 18-month window, but as you see, because we're already, 8 or 9 months out, the time does go fast, unfortunately. You could go to the next slide. Excellent. Good stopping point. Are there any questions at this point?
Hi, Jenny. Yes, there are some great questions. So
Great.
based on what you just said, I'm going to try to kind of wrap it up. But somebody that was with us today was told by the help desk, the FEMA help desk, that their case was open for years. And what it sounds like what you just framed for us is that a case, the maximum length of time it could be open would be the 18 months.
That's been the practice in the past, yes. And so I
Okay.
I would be very suspicious of reassurance that it would be open longer than that.
Okay. And just for clarity, the 18 months is started from January 7th, from the date of incident, not your date of application,
That's
right?
correct. That is correct. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. And then, so if the same person received a rejection letter from FEMA and was advised to appeal, right? That's what we're talking about today and what you just sort of highlighted for us, that you may be getting notifications that you're denied, but you would need to appeal by providing more documentation through your portal. And that, in fact, is what's going to keep the case open and active. Is that accurate?
That's
Ish.
generally speaking, yeah. The silence is where it could become a problem. So like if you don't say or do anything after you receive that, or after they send, that negative decision or that denial, and then you don't send anything back and you don't respond, and it's been, let's say, 4 months instead of the 2 months, yeah, then you would have an extra hurdle to overcome why you waited so long. Um, but there's still, uh, even if you're sending, it's not always going to be sending documents. So sometimes it's going to be you're not eligible, and they're not requesting documents, and maybe that they'll say you're not eligible because somebody else from your household applied or something along those lines. So they're not necessarily requesting documents, but that's where you basically just want to make sure your response is, that you have a response to that as soon as possible.
Okay, wonderful. Um, Also, someone shared that their case was closed and they're wondering how to reopen it.
Reopen. That we might be saying the same thing. Maybe it's like they
Okay,
made a decision, and so then it feels very final, and it feels like, okay, that it's close and that there's nobody else working on this because they've made a decision, and maybe the impacted individual didn't engage back. And so the best thing to do to get them to pay attention again, reopen it, if you will, is to to respond to whatever they said, which I'm assuming, it was some sort of denial, or the only reason you're still engaged with FEMA is because you want something else or more. And so the best thing to do is to respond with additional evidence or proof or explanation of the continued need for assistance and continued eligibility or past eligibility for whatever was previously requested. I know that's a lot of words. I hope that.
Yeah, I think so. I think we got it. And then I guess in the same line, there's two questions around needing to wait to hear back from their insurance, right? To understand what that gap is, right?
Yeah.
And and how do they keep their case alive and active if they're still waiting for their insurance?
That's a great question, and it's good for folks who actually did apply for FEMA. Sometimes people don't apply for FEMA in time because they think they're not eligible because of insurance, and so I would keep them updated. Don't let more than make sure you respond to whatever the initial denial was, which is probably you're not eligible because you have insurance, and so then your response is, I have insurance, but like either I'm underinsured or they haven't confirmed what they're going to pay. And so you want to keep updated with whatever updates you're getting from insurance, in the possibility that whatever insurance provides, it's insufficient and there might still be a role for FEMA to play. So you want to just keep uploading those updates, or hopefully they haven't said in those situations your case is closed yet, because there's usually a recognition that the insurance can take time.
Okay. And again, just to be super granular, the way that a person would stay active is through their client portal, right? Through their
That's
FEMA
the
client
best way,
portal.
yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
And
Um,
that's the best way, but and I know this is easier said than done, but it's usually wise to have periodic phone calls to confirm with FEMA updates. I'm still waiting on insurance, just to like that's the best practice. If you can wait on hold and reach somebody at FEMA, just to stay really active on their radar.
okay. And should we be asking a question like, are you documenting this conversation in my file? Right? Like just making
That's
sure they're
Yeah,
really, right? They're really staying current and
right.
documenting your participation.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We do have a couple questions just about FEMA eligibility, and I know you have a whole presentation. I don't know if this is the best moment to ask some of those questions. Like someone was asking about, can they still apply for housing assistance? There's a couple questions like that, and I just don't know if this is the best time to ask those or if we should table those for later.
We can, I actually don't have a preference. We can ask those. We could do those now.
Okay, great. So can someone still apply for like the housing rental assistance or the housing assistance if they haven't applied before?
I mean, it will depend. It kind of depends. It depends on what they did apply for before, and what the housing assistance is like one of these broad terms, and so like what housing assistance they still need. I think the what people will not likely be able to get at this point, if they haven't already applied for this, although if there's anyone on this meeting who knows otherwise, please chime in. It would be unlikely that somebody could get like continuing rental assistance at this point if they weren't already getting some form of rental assistance, but it could be that somebody could still get housing assistance, like to repair or replace their home again. And that would be like a very common thing, especially for somebody who's just now hearing from their insurance and was denied or, only partially covered. That would be a very common example of now they could be eligible for housing assistance. And so, not to be too lawyerly, but that kind of really
Okay.
depends. Yeah.
Great. And just to be, just to be concrete, if somebody didn't apply for FEMA at all, they didn't meet that deadline. I forget what that deadline was back in March. If they had not applied, is there still a window to apply?
There's not. and again, if anyone happens to know if there's been any exceptions, but there's usually, so that window was extended, as you know, and then there's usually a 60-day grace period after that.
Okay.
But because we're beyond that extra 60 days, uh, uh, they would not take a late application. So you would have had to have made some sort of application or connection with FEMA um, early within that,
Yeah.
first that
Thank
first
you.
several months. Yeah.
Thank you. And then we do just have a couple of questions, and I know this was one of our seminars or webinars back in January. So if you need some more information on just how to understand FEMA and the different buckets of assistance, really encourage anybody who's on this today to go back. It's on our website, on our client portal. There, we had a fabulous Brandy Johnson Thompson who did a whole review of FEMA. So I'm sorry to, but wondering if you could just give us a quick overview, Jenny, of a lot of questions about if I have insurance, will I ever get anything from FEMA? Like, is it worth, is it worth my effort to stay in the game and keep appealing?
Uh, Maybe. So just very big picture, FEMA is a program of last resort. And so FEMA is not a program that's designed to make everybody whole or to assist everybody or anybody impacted by a disaster. FEMA's sole purpose in this kind of response work at this stage or any stage really is to supplement either what the state or local government is doing and or not to supplement, well, sort of, um, to assist after, all other sources of assistance has been exhausted. And so they're not the primary place to go for assistance, particularly, again, at this stage for any kind of long-term housing needs, for replacement of property. But um, where they piece in is where other players haven't been able to help. So where the state and local government programs might not be able to help, which is basically there aren't really many sources of help, and where your insurance is unable to help. And so to the extent that you have insurance, if you feel like, or if you've already received a significant award for personal property, it might be something that isn't worth staying in the FEMA game. As far as the buckets, I won't go into all of them, but there are basically two big ones, a housing one, and then like an other needs, which is a lot for a lot of people. That's like where your personal property and some other stuff goes. Those max out at 43,500 each for this disaster. And so if you've for personal property, for example, if you've already received more than that or are likely to receive more than that from insurance or from other sources, again, maybe you had a GoFundMe account and you got $60,000 there. FEMA will not also help because they will not duplicate a benefit. That's a big term. And if they do, they will actually come back to try to get it from you later. So you really do want to avoid that. But if you're still fighting with insurance and you don't know how it's going to turn out, or you really don't think they're going to give you a lot or all that you need, the FEMA can make up the difference. And so I recognize that it takes a lot of time and effort and energy, and it's not easy to work with them. And there's a lot of other things that you all are having to navigate at this point. And so there also does come a point where, it might be like, how much energy do I still have left? But to the extent that you haven't received anything from FEMA or you haven't received anything from insurance, um, or you're uninsured, FEMA is the source of disaster assistance, and it could be potential money that's still, or potential resources still on the table and available. And in that respect, it could be worth it. So it depends
Wonderful.
again. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, I'm gonna turn off my video and we'll continue with the presentation for the next section.
Thank you. Go to the next slide. Yeah. Um, So again, and I'm saying some of this, and I know it sounds easy, and I also know that it is not. And so, in the perfect world, you should request your FEMA file. So you should do that over the phone and or in writing, and you're doing that in situations where maybe you've already been denied or you've had this exchange going back and forth, and you basically want to know what FEMA has in your record, and or you want to be able to see the inspection report that was done of your property, so that you kind of have a better idea what you're working with. I mean, so that you can put yourself in their shoes a little bit to see the way they're viewing the situation, which will sometimes help you be able to respond and address their concerns a little bit better. So a lot of times it's just miscommunications, like they're not uh, they either don't know what they don't know about your situation. For example, if there's multiple people living in a house, but you are all separate households, they won't know that unless you tell them. And so sometimes it's just clarifying things, but sometimes it's really having to prove a lot. Again, there's a lot of FEMA programs, so there's a lot of different reasons why somebody might be eligible or ineligible for any of those, and sometimes it's just clear, getting clear on what you're trying to prove your eligibility for, and what their understanding is. When you can engage with FEMA in person, there's pros and cons to that. It's usually a preferred method to engage with FEMA, although sometimes it seems, and maybe you've already experienced this, there's inconsistency with what folks in person, like at a disaster recovery center, might tell you versus what somebody on the phone might tell you versus the letters or denials that you receive from them. But sometimes that face-to-face help is useful, and word on the street is that it's possible that there are still FEMA representatives at the Altadena Community Center, at least through the end of this month, probably not longer, and so that might be one way to engage with them. And sometimes, again, the phone calls, or even escalating the phone calls to their tier 2 workers or their supervisors, can be helpful if you feel like you've already had a lot of back and forth, and that they're still not really understanding your situation, or you're not understanding why they're denying you or not giving you everything that you've asked for. And so, again, getting on the same page with what the issue is. They might be right, they might be wrong. Sometimes it's just hard to understand what they're even concerned about, or what sometimes they're not sure which program you're applying for, what extra sort of support you're looking for too. And so the sooner you can at least like get on the same page with what issue are we trying to resolve here, and then identifying any new or previous evidence that you've had but you haven't shared with them. Sometimes that's all they need to just be able to say yes and tie things up on their end. Could go to the next slide. Um, so this is an example of language that is in that might be appear in your FEMA denial. Although I think this example might be an old one because it cites an old dollar amount, but this is still how it reads. And you will see that there's this code that INS-HA is one of these codes. They don't always explain what the codes mean. This example is like you're not we can't make a decision right now because you have insurance. And so for the housing assistance, right now, we know you have insurance, but we don't have anything related to your insurance. And so we can't really say yes or no until we have more information related to your insurance to know what your insurance is going to cover. And insurance is a flag for FEMA, like you might not be eligible because you might be getting this help otherwise. But again, there's a recognition that you might not get anything from insurance, or they might not insure you fully. And so there might still be a role for FEMA. You can look up those codes, and maybe I can drop that in the chat. Because there's a lot of other codes, and again, they don't always break it down, and that's where just getting on the same page about what the issue is can be really helpful in understanding. Because even this response, you're like, it's not necessarily it's not necessarily clear that you could still be eligible. Although it does say the very bottom, it does say that if you have it, we might be able to help. And so that's another example where it's a request for sending in documents. Some people don't send in documents right away um, because they haven't heard from their insurance, and that's where you definitely want to at least acknowledge this within that 60 days, even if you don't have an update from insurance, so that they don't think that you're all good. Okay, you could go to the next This guide here, the Individual Assistance Program and Policy Guide, you can find it by Googling that on the internet. It's FEMA's guide that kind of breaks down the method and the law and the rules that govern a lot of their different programs. Unfortunately, this document has not been updated since 2021. A lot of this is still very valid as far as explaining the different programs, although there was some significant FEMA reform last year. And so some sections in here like are a little bit outdated. I think the biggest one to flag is there's language in there that says you have to apply for the Small Business Administration loan before being eligible for certain FEMA programs, and that requirement no longer exists. So that shouldn't be alarming to you. But this guide can be really useful in just, again, trying to understand these programs a little bit better. And it's often what some of the folks at FEMA are relying on in determining some of these decisions as well. Um, you can skip, move forward, please. Next slide. This slide, I think, says what I just said. These were some of the big changes that happened last year. I don't really think you need to know about how life existed before these changes, except in the off chance or that any of the FEMA workers that you have been engaged with might still have some of these older understandings that could be relevant. But I haven't heard that that's really happening too much on the ground or, with this disaster. So I think either folks at FEMA have been trained or they're new staff people. So this is all new to them too. You can move forward, please. Okay, so in preparing an appeal, I mentioned earlier that it can be very simple. It can be just this exchange of documents. You asked me for my insurance. I'm going to send you back my insurance information. This keeps the conversation going, but it's also could be sharing that you're still interested. Although in that example, they also didn't really deny the person completely yet. They said we need more information to make a decision. Um, if you can, again, use some of the language from this IAPPG, that's helpful because they're familiar with that language. But you don't have to overthink it either. And really knowing that the FEMA employee who's looking at your appeal, again, it's not an attorney. It's not somebody who's expecting this very high level legal argument. It's somebody who's probably reviewing a lot of those in a single day, and they probably will have little or no experience with your actual case. And so it would be important for you to make it as simple as possible. This is why I'm eligible. Here's the extra information. This is what you missed last time, so that there's not so much for them to comb through, and to make it, again, as easy as possible for them to understand and or grant your request. Um, Keep it as simple as possible, and yeah, please provide all the responsive documents. And if you're trying to get something still, you're trying to get an old receipt, or you're trying to get an old policy, or something that you don't have at the moment, you might be able, you certainly can supplement it later, but you might be able to say, like, I'm working on getting this, if you know that you have it for sure. Or if you, again, if and when you get it later, certainly send it their way as soon as possible. Thank you. I think we can skip that slide, actually. We can move forward. So I keep talking about, like, send them evidence, send them documents, give them what they're asking for. In the perfect world, what does that look like? It might be receipts, it might be estimates or utility bills or titles. It's copies of those insurance documents. Sometimes you don't have an actual um, piece of paper or actual document, or you don't have the original lease agreement, for example. And a lot of times, the reason why people don't have, like, the most perfect or best evidence is because it was destroyed in the disaster. And so that's not uncommon. And clearly that comes up a lot. And so if there's no way for you to prove something, you can provide a sworn affidavit, where you would give all the information that's necessary, and declare that, this is true. And FEMA is, we'll look at that, we'll take it into consideration, and we'll usually want some other supporting, information to go along with it. But depending upon what, again, the facts are, or what the request is, that might be something that they can work with, to prove that maybe you owned something that, you owned something that you had inherited, or that was never formally put into your name. There's different examples of how FEMA will accept sworn statements to prove certain things. And so, like, that's sort of, if you have nothing else, you can do that. The third party statements here, that's the same sort of thing. But that would be like you have a neighbor, or a coworker, or the postal man, or somebody else who can, who, for example, they knew you lived in that dwelling behind the main residence, or whatever the situation might be. These aren't like the preferred sources of evidence or proof, but they are all things that people have done and that can support your position. um the photos could be relevant, if you're trying to talk about like a personal property claim, depending upon, or just certain kinds of damage. So to the extent you have pictures of things either before or after the disaster, that kind of evidence can be very helpful, depending upon what you're trying to prove. The big takeaway here is that, as I've said, it's very unlikely that whoever is reviewing what you've submitted as an appeal has any real familiarity with your case. And so, as easy as you can present this information, and explain any unique facts or pieces to your situation, probably the better, so that that person can easily get it, and ideally move forward with granting the request. Next slide.
Great. Thank you, Jenny. We do have a couple questions in this section. So somebody wrote in the chat, is there still an open disaster recovery center to go to? Again, our understanding is that the one in Altadena is still open. We will put in the chat what we're able to find. It looks like it's still open 10 to 5, but again, we'll put that in the chat. Also, there is a thing called the Disaster Recovery Case Manager, and there's certain not-for-profits and organizations providing those services in Los Angeles at this time. Our understanding is most of those are at capacity, but we're going to do some research after this webinar ourselves, and we'll provide some additional information if you're wanting to get connected to a case manager on how to do that, how to apply for Catholic Charities. We need to do a little more research, and we will guide everybody on what to do and where to go if you're feeling like you want to get some more additional help in that way. Another specific question that came in, which I think you just covered in a previous slide, which is if somebody had received $43,000 or more from their insurance, would that mean they're automatically excluded from any additional FEMA support?
It would depend what the $43,000 was for from the insurance. And so if it didn't cover, it really depends. So, and so that's sometimes part of the problem, is getting the breakdown from insurance. But it depends if it was for your personal property, or if it was for housing assistance, and then it would depend on which one you're trying to get from FEMA. So it's possible you got the $43,000 in personal property replacement from your insurance, but they weren't covering, like, your temporary housing or something along those lines. That might be a situation where FEMA would cover could be able to give you something. So that's where the buckets again matter. But if you're trying to just get more in personal property, then yes, FEMA would not be able to help there, even though most people will have more losses than than the amount that their insurance and or FEMA gives them.
Thank you. And then again, I think this was on one of your slides, so just want to remind everybody that we, after our webinar today, this is recorded, we will do a follow-up email with all of the resources we're talking about, and Jenny is mentioning in the chat, as well as this recording. So you might need to quickly go through and get to that housing slide, but somebody was asking if, if their case was still open and they needed to apply for more housing assistance, is that something they can do through their client portal?
It it depends on the housing assistance you're trying to apply for, but I mean, I think the best thing that that person could do would be to call FEMA with the specific request, whether of what they need, if that's more money or more time or whatever the request is. It could get lost in the portal, like if you're already receiving something from FEMA. So,
Okay.
and
So
to
connect by phone or go to the disaster recovery center while it's still open.
Yeah, and to the extent anyone has one of the disaster case managers, they're actually funded through FEMA. It's part of the FEMA's individual assistance program. That's something that the assigned disaster case manager, if you have one, might be able to assist with as well.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to the next section.
Okay. The good news or bad news, I guess, is I think I covered a lot of this already. This is the form that I referenced earlier. This is the FEMA appeal form. A lot of people may have received this already with one of their responses from FEMA. If not, this is something that you can also pull up online. This form used to be, there used to be much more formal requirements to a FEMA appeal, but that's no longer the case. So again, FEMA should be accepting almost anything from you and treating it as an appeal, or as you're not done with their case, you're not done with your case, or you disagree with their decision. But I do think that where this form is not required, it can be very helpful to use, mostly because it is very clear what it is. Again, I've talked about how the person reviewing your file is not like an expert with your case, and so to the extent you can make it very easy on that person to know what the correspondence is, if they see this, they know that it's an appeal. They know that you're providing some explanation or documents that is likely to be different than information that they already have. And so it's a good signal to the person reviewing it, how to approach the correspondence. And so it's not required. Good thing to do. And it gives you that spot there where you can explain your reason for the appeal. If that little box is not enough, you can add to it. You can add pages to it. Again, with the caution that less might be more. You want to make sure you're giving them all the information that's necessary for them to make the decision, but not too much story or background where they can get lost and not really find the information that they need to be able to say yes. So we can move on from this slide. So if you're going to provide this explanation, whether it's on that form or just in general that you've already submitted or that you're going to submit with them, I've said this, but to say it again, something concise. You basically want to say why they're wrong, what they didn't know or what they didn't understand with your situation. um, you want to focus for most people, it's really focusing on the facts, because something about your situation, your particular case, your story is what is going to probably make it or break it. It's unlikely the law or the rules, but it's really more, this is why I need, this is proof that I had this refrigerator before the disaster, and nothing's paid to replace it, and I need that support, or this is proof that I lived in this home and was impacted by the disaster, and I'm eligible for assistance, or whatever exact things that are specific to your case. And again, just generally speaking, if you're still having this back and forth with FEMA this far out from the disaster, it usually is something related to the facts of your particular situation, and the extra evidence you need, or again, just plain language explanation, so that they can understand where things are at. That's this problem, like that's this thought about the describe any irregularities here. A lot of times it's just explaining why what happened in your situation is or was unusual, and so that's why, which is helpful to help them understand so that they might realize their decision was wrong. That could include like irregularities with the inspection. Sometimes the inspectors come out and maybe the person who they inspected didn't really speak English or weren't able to show them a certain part of the house, or there could be just again nuances or exceptions or irregularities that the person who made the decision may not have known. But if you explain that or highlight to them, it could be enough reason to overturn their decision or to grant what you're requesting. And then if there are any significant or larger um, problems with with the way they're understanding your situation or your case, that's something that you would want to at least address if they've got something completely wrong. And to the extent there's anything in the FEMA guides, or any other kind of legal arguments or citing back to just their own eligibility rules that you can include, that could also be worth your time to point that out and make sure you at least get that in there so they can see it. If you're doing these kind of explanations, or attaching additional pages to the FEMA appeal form, you want to make sure you have your FEMA registration number on every page so that it all gets tied to you. It doesn't get lost. They know that it's all related to your appeal and not to somebody else's. So that's an important thing that they like as well. You could go to the next slide. This is not a presentation on FEMA overpayment or recoupments, but I mentioned it very briefly earlier, and I just want to flag that FEMA does do audits, and that they will, if they've determined that somebody was paid something, received FEMA benefits that they were not eligible for, they will try to get that money back. And so a very common one is the one that I think I highlighted earlier, which is if somebody already received support um, for something specific, whether that's like housing support or whether that's certain, replacement of personal property. If they've already received that maybe from insurance or from some other source, and then FEMA finds out about it and that they specifically gave you funds for that same purpose, they will say that was a duplication of benefits. That's, again, not FEMA's role. Their role is to cover things that you weren't able to get help from anywhere else. The sticking point, or where that often feels unfair, is that a lot of people may have received help from various sources, but it will rarely ever be enough to make you whole, to fully replace all that you lost in the disaster. And so it won't feel like a duplication of benefits, because you likely will still need a lot more financial support. But all FEMA support and money is for a specific purpose, and so that's where it's important to know a little bit about those buckets or what you're specifically asking them for, to make sure you're not getting that help from anywhere else. And that's where it's important to try to keep receipts of how you do use your FEMA money, if by chance they come back at some point to say that you were overpaid in some way. If FEMA does say that, if they say, hey, you weren't eligible for benefits, it's important to know that you actually have a right to appeal that, because sometimes that is wrong. And again, same situation, they need more information, but sometimes it's also correct, and that's where just understanding this rule is important so that you avoid getting into this situation. Next. So I think it's really important to like it. There's a lot of different tabs in your FEMA portal. Sometimes it's easy to miss them. Sometimes it's easy to miss different correspondence from FEMA. Sometimes you're getting multiple letters in a similar time period, and it's very unclear if they are new requests or decisions, or if they're requests or decisions that are in response to something that you may have sent them. It's that doesn't always track. And so it's important to review that regularly. They can be easily missed. And then again, you want to make sure that you're getting any information they want as soon as possible. You're probably uploading that at this point, but that you can also mail things to them. If you if you mail anything to them, you should keep copies of it, and note the date that you mailed it so that you have that for your records. Again, you don't have to use the FEMA appeal form, but if you do, you should be concise in what you're explaining to them, and make sure that you're probably using that form along with providing additional evidence, or documents that they've already requested. And this feels duplicative, but again, you're doing most all of this through your disasterassistance.gov, if you can, and that's has been a fairly streamlined way to communicate with them to the extent that you're able to do that. Sometimes that can be a barrier for folks as well. If there are people still in person, sometimes, again, that won't be for much longer, so it could be really good to seize that opportunity while it's still available, and could be an easier way to get some clarity, especially this many months after the disaster. It might be a good way to just really try to get through to somebody, like, why are things still at this, why do things stand the way they stand at this point? Like, what more do they need to understand what you have been trying to convey or prove to them? Okay. Oh, more questions or final questions.
Thank you, Jen. We do have a few last questions. There's a couple of people that have asked questions that seem to kind of fall into this broader question. Is on the FEMA website, or do you know of any place people can go to sort of get lists of things? And what I mean by that is somebody has a question about, they were meeting with the FEMA inspector and they felt that they were only asking about like appliances and work-related equipment, and sort of that question of what is eligible for refund, or what's eligible in those categories, to
In that,
submit.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, that's it.
In that IAPPG, that I don't know if that got dropped in the chat, a link for that, but in the individual assistance program and policy guide, that's exactly what makes that useful, is it does provide those kind of examples of like what it means. We keep using the term bucket. So what all the
Right.
different buckets mean, like examples of the kind of expenses that go in there. And that's a really good point that I actually didn't make, is that FEMA doesn't cover any sort of property that was damaged, or any sort of personal property. It's very specific things. It's really like the stuff essential to health and safety and to basic living. And so it's to replace key appliances or key furniture, clothes, but not like your entire wardrobe, but key stuff from a kitchen, and so that they do have very specific things, and it's not going to replace like your art or your extracurricular kind of supplies. And so that is actually a really good point to make. It's not replacing all the things that was destroyed. It is very certain things.
Okay, great. And so if we don't have that link, we'll follow up everybody. We'll get that link. We'll make sure that that link and reference sheet is available in our follow-up email, in our chat. I guess in that same lane, we have a question about this idea of like the things we needed for transitional housing, right? We moved in, we needed some things like a bed and some things for transitional housing in order to stabilize. But how does that work out versus the things that we're hoping to have long term? Right? We actually rebuild, and we have the couch we're looking for. I don't know if that's clear, if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean it's similar in that it's only these certain things that they'll recover, but I mean that, and this is where the whole thing doesn't match up with reality very well, because you could be eligible for the replacement of the couch, for example, or the bed. But if you don't have anywhere to put it right now, like a lot of people just practically aren't buying it either. And so that's and there's not like a great solution to that. Like they will replace that, and then and so what you can say is, I've lost my couch, or my entire home was destroyed. These are the things that I had that and there's a lot of things that FEMA does cover. And so for a lot of people, you can get to that max amount, especially if you lost big things like your car, for example, or significant things, not counting the house. But that's where you kind of have to keep money put aside, technically speaking, so that if they come back later and say, how'd you spend that money? You wouldn't say, I spent the money on the car that you replaced, but I went and bought jet skis. Like that's where it becomes a problem, the recoupment problem. And so the expectation isn't, they're not going to give you the money later, so they can award it to you now, but that's how they're expecting you to pay for it. So you don't have to go buy the couch now, but that is, if they've designated the money for, certain personal property, you can't then use it to go on a vacation to Mexico.
Right. Okay. And then, as I think you've just highlighted, it can be really confusing and it can be frustrating. It's certainly what we hear a lot. And so I wonder if you do have any tricks or tips on how to get in touch with somebody, how to get more clarity on what we should be focusing our energy on.
Yeah, again, generally, if you can catch somebody in person, that would be, I would prioritize that, especially with the information that we received that it's likely that if they are in fact still on the ground in Altadena, that they're leaving this month. So I would try to catch somebody in person if you can. I would try to connect with disaster case managers, but otherwise, i- it's patience, being on the hold with them, trying to connect people by phone, and then again elevating, if you have something more complex, or if you're not getting a good answer, either calling back, like, and we've done this, you hang up on the like, okay, fine, and try getting somebody else, or elevating that conversation, to talk to a supervisor or somebody else who might be able to understand the situation a little bit better, because it is extraordinarily frustrating, and definitely, their written and their verbal communication is not always clear.
Great. And so on that same vein, it seems like a little bit of the cycle with FEMA is you get a denial, right? And then you kind of have to have the chutzpah or the grit, right, to go back in with more information. And I'm just wondering, um, when should we be in tune to just moving on altogether, right? Is that really after the 18 months? Or are there some clues or some ways we can do a self-assessment of when is the time to let go of this particular lane, even though it may be very unsatisfying to not know the answers?
Yeah. So that's it's definitely a very personal question, and so it's going to depend on in an individual, where they're at, what they've already received financially, or otherwise from other sources of help, how much they have left in them. But I mean, the my gut response to this is, you want to first make sure, that you understand why they're telling you no. And so I think that's important. And so it's very possible that they're telling you no, because you're not eligible. And then it's helpful to understand why I mean, that kind of closure would be helpful to understand. I'm not eligible because I already received help for this type of assistance, or I'm not eligible because my partner applied and received the help and we lived together. I mean, those are clear examples, and it's not always clear. Um, but if you haven't received that, or if you're very certain, like you're I'll use you're arguing, probably is what it is. You're going back and forth on something very specific, and you do have the extra proof or evidence that they need. I wouldn't give up at that point if you haven't yet presented the information that they need to say yes. And so a lot of times they're saying no just because they're missing information. And so if you haven't yet given them that information, I would keep that moving forward. But if you've given them all the proof you can, and you've had several back and forths and you're not getting on the same page and it's just unclear to you, I mean, that might be the point. But to the extent that, there are different um, legal services programs through the community in the area who are providing help, there's different clinics and opportunities that are happening around town in various ways. It could be worth trying to have some sort of consult with somebody just to confirm you're not missing anything. But and the other point, and you flagged this earlier, the other point where it might be worth giving up is um, if you do think that you've received enough or something from insurance, and it might be for the same sort of thing that FEMA covers. Because sometimes I think people will keep pursuing FEMA because you think, well, I still need extra help. The insurance wasn't enough, and that is certainly true. But that's not the role that FEMA plays, and so that might be another point where it's like, I'm probably not going to get anything else from FEMA. I got what I got from insurance. It's not enough, and that's just unfortunately like the way this um, disaster recovery program is structured.
Thank you for that. And I guess a little bit of what I'm hearing in that too is that if you haven't submitted um, repairs or things to your insurance, right? Is there a lane for FEMA if you have opted not to use your personal insurance? I mean, so many people are worried about their coverage being dropped, right? Because of their utilization of insurance out here. So I just was wondering if you could provide some clarity on that.
Yeah, FEMA will want to see your policy. And so like if and so if your policy covers something you're asking FEMA for, that's where it will be a problem because there will be an expectation that you're using that. But sometimes what you're asking FEMA for, you, insurance doesn't cover, or sometimes people thought they were insured and they actually had been dropped and didn't realize it, and you don't find that out right away. And so there are situations where you can still clearly catch the FEMA. Um, but yeah, if you're not pursuing the FEMA, I mean, if you're not pursuing the insurance claim, that is understandable for the reason and other reasons that you just gave, but that would be a problem for FEMA.
Great, thank you. And then is there a way to contact FEMA on our client portal? How can you get a list of what you received and under what bucket, if that makes sense?
The It won't necessarily be clear under what bucket. I mean, it will only be clear by what they're saying, like you were denied childcare expenses, or you were just denied rental assistance, or so it will only be you will only get like clues by what their correspondence says. And I think it was let me look at my slides really fast. In this one of these slides, I said to check the correspondence tab is what I
Okay,
recall that it's called. But the correspondence tab is one place, but then there's also, and I can't recall what it's called off the top of my head at the moment. It's been a couple months, but like the decisions tab or an ability to like appeal tab. And
okay,
so that's one of the tricks is there could be information posted in two different places. So I always, when I'm in there, I go through every single one just to make sure I'm not missing anything. And you'll
yeah,
see when something hasn't been read, it will still be bolded, and that's how you might catch if you've missed something. Because the other piece to all this is FEMA, it sounds like it's one big thing, but there's a bunch of departments within FEMA. And so the people who are looking at your housing assistance are not the same people who are looking at, your claim for personal property. And so they're sending letters. And I kind of mentioned this earlier at different intervals. And so it's not clear that what you send back who's responding to what. And so it's best, if possible, to try to just, we used to say put it all in one response back to them, but it seems like their preference now is respond to each thing individually. They should, in theory, they should be catching it however you give it to them, but in making it easy to them, I would respond to all of the things that they send that you should be able to find in your correspondence tab and sometimes in other tabs.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jenny. This has been really, really helpful. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your time. Thank you to Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. Our webinar is concluding, everyone. Again, if you didn't have an opportunity to submit your intake form to LAFLA for a consultation and you are interested in that, you think you might meet that eligibility criteria, you can directly call them, and they still, that's part of what they're doing for their practice and their business and supporting California wildfire people, is to do these free consultations. So just want to encourage everybody, if you did not have that opportunity to do that, call them, see if you're eligible. We are still researching other legal consultations and resources for those folks that didn't meet that threshold, that income threshold, and we will be reaching out to you via email. So thank you so much for joining us. We will follow up in the next couple days with an email of the resources put in the chat and of this video recording. All of our webinar series is located on the Entertainment Community Fund's website and client portal. We hope to see you real soon. Take good care, everybody. Thank you for joining us today.